Hello again. I'm Kenny Fikes, once again, your host of the iKnow Media Roundtable, where we bring you conscientious clarity through both empirical experience alongside reasoned analysis and application. Today, we're going to talk about 45 banning diversity training in U.S. agencies and federal agencies, as he's calling it un-American. So in other words, learning about diversity and differences is un-American. And not only that, he's actually telling the agency heads and legal departments to figure out ways to undo these contracts that have already begun. Before we learn about who Elisa is and Jay again today, we're letting you guys know that we're going to have a guest today who's Keisha A Rivers, who does a lot of diversity training across the country with certain corporations and small businesses. Because it's quite apropos for her to chime in on today because it's what she does. So, Elisa, how you doing today?
Hey, Kenny. I am Elisa Simmons. I'm a Montessori guide in East Texas. I am doing well today, but I am sad that we have to have this conversation because it's weird that we would have a president in 2020 that felt this was un-American.
Jay.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jay Ellis. I'm from Houston. I'm a mom of three. I'm personally doing pretty well. Had a good day today, but I too am tired, just really tired. Today was exhausting, kind of just reading the news. And I know a lot of people are tired. But I'm most tired of trying to convince our fellow human beings that they need to be more human. And sometimes it's discouraging, but we have to keep having the conversations and fighting the good fight. But tonight I'm going to need to rely on my comrades and friends for some stamina to continue being constructive in this conversation.
That makes sense. Thank you for your honesty on that. And it really is a wonderful segue into talking about why we're doing this. It is so that we can continue having these conversations, not just around one event and show outrage as that event then subsides and all the conversation goes away. I've said it again and again and again, but not everyone has watched every show. This is our way of taking our proverbial bite out of the elephant to keep the conversation alive. And you said it today, Jay. Elisa said it the last show. It is absolutely exhausting that we have to continue this. And so the thinking behind Mr. Trump's ban on Friday is that it was, I read in an article, it's a bat signal out to evangelicals. They felt like his approval rating with that group of people, with that block of voters and a large part of his base, was down about 8 points to 59% since April. And so it was a shout out to them. The document basically says that diversity training in the United States says that our country is inherently racist and evil. I don't know if that's what anyone's diversity training says, but I'm pretty sure most diversity training, if it really gets to the root, will probably conclude inherently racist. I don't know about the word evil, but we can play with that. So, Elisa, why don't you start us off today?
Have you guys ever taken diversity training? I would assume so, at least Jay with the hospital. I have, and I don't know if it's because I tend not to allow outside conversations define who I am, but I've never sat in a diversity training and felt like I was a bad white person. I just never felt that way. I also never, because one of the articles, it was saying that I was in a discussion group, and one of the people were like, they basically just tell white people to feel bad about themselves. And I never got that. I think we've repeatedly said on this show, though, Kenny, I think it's you that always goes back and tells us the story of, it, at first they came for them, it wasn't me. Then they came for them, it wasn't me. And then no one was there when they came for me. Well, if we stop talking about the diversity training when it comes to minorities, the next one's going to be people with disabilities, and the next one's going to be women. And so, like, you can't do that. And so I think for the people who feel like this is un-American, you need to really pay attention to what your circle looks like, because it would, like, what about that training makes you feel dirty and bad? What about so maybe you don't know enough about your history. I don't know. I'm going to go on a rant. Jay or Kenny, y'all take me off this rant.
Well,
So,
I mean, I think that diversity training, it asks you to become more self-aware, and coming into self-awareness is painful, because self-awareness is not about you looking at what's wonderful about yourself, but it's recognizing about what you may need to change. For me, I've had diversity training, and in the last several years, done a lot of training around disability, because I'm training to become an advocate, and my youngest son has autism, and I wanted to become an advocate, and I had to learn about the diversity around disability. And that was really painful at first, because I had to come face to face with inherent beliefs that I had about people with disabilities and about my very own son, that I didn't have expectations of him. I didn't think he was capable of certain things. That was just in the back of my mind. I loved him, but there were certain things I just wouldn't have expected him to do, wouldn't have taught him to do. And it was really painful to learn that I was living with these biases towards this child that I love. But that was absolutely necessary and critical for me to be able to help him and to be able to advocate for him and others. And I never came away from a training, though, feeling like they were just trying to tell me I'm a bad person or I'm a bad mom. I didn't feel it was personally directed against me, but I realized that I needed to become aware of my own thinking and how that affected my attitudes and my behaviors, and how that would reflect in how I treated not just my son, but anyone with a disability. And so I think that this is a similar thing. I can't imagine that there's any diversity training that tells the people in the group who may be in the majority or may hold the most power, you're awful and you're terrible and you need to just check yourself and walk away feeling bad. I mean, that would defeat the entire purpose. The purpose of diversity training is to try to unite, not to divide.
sure. Well, and the other ironic thing about all this is that he was looking to appeal to certain white evangelical Christians who feel that all diversity and inclusive type training is against what they believe. For some reason, it's very difficult to comprehend. But not only that, we're talking about a macro level. We're talking about societal ills. We're talking about being better as a people and treating each other well, which are certainly Christian principles. People aren't willing to pull back those layers, and they just want to sweep it under the carpet. But I will tell you, if you're willing to do the work, your life gets better. I'm not going to go all the way down that personal hole, but I know that in my own development as a man, as a father, as a husband at one point, as an employer of other people, I've gotten better over the years. I've just gotten better. You know, there are things that I wasn't good at in my 20s in those processes, and some of them, even as someone, even consider myself a decent person, I feel bad about them. Sometimes almost daily I think about it and I go, really, you know, and you just have to sort of forgive yourself for some of your own behavior and some of your thoughts and biases that you live with about people, even people close to you at times. And so I throw that out there because from time to time in our show, you guys know that I do that in my own little self-awareness and self-reflection. And I offer that to say, you know, if I can do that on a personal level, I don't understand why people can't stop sweeping large societal problems under the rugs. What do you got, Elisa?
I agree with you. I also think because of this decision, there's been a lot of his decisions that now all of his support base get behind, and a few of them has really ruffled the military, the leaders of the military. I honestly think this, because of exactly what you're saying, Kenny, will actually be something that the military leadership will not follow through with. Diversity training is so ingrained in the military's doctrine now, they wouldn't be able to undo it. And so I think that but their goal is that their soldiers, as they mature and grow, are able to grow with the times and grow with what their subordinates now maybe identifying with. So I think that the backlash of satisfying that one part of his base could be pretty significant, and might really affect him more than what that base would have saved him.
And you know, the military has no choice. I mean, when you're talking about going for broke, fighting for keeps to the death, you can't have that nonsense in a foxhole, right? You may be in the accounting department back at the Pentagon, but you can't have it out there amongst the ranks. So now Keisha, I think, is going to come in. She has done a lot of this training around the country, and she is also our producer. So you guys watching you guys don't see her every show, but she's here every show. Hello, Keisha. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do and why it is so apropos that you are joining us today?
Well, thank you guys for having me in front of the camera instead of behind. And for everyone watching and listening, my name is Keisha A Rivers. I am President and Chief Outcome Facilitator of the CARS Group. We facilitate outcomes by equipping people to embrace and manage change. And I am also a diversity, equity, and inclusion facilitator. So I work with companies on their strategy. I work with companies on train the trainer models, where I work with diversity and inclusion councils. We create DEI strategic plans and integrate diversity, equity, and inclusion into what companies do when it comes to employee engagement, leadership, learning, and creating success. So that's
right. And so let me help tout that people listen to what you say. One of Keisha's clients she works with the city of Charlotte. Another is a large multinational corporation. She trained some of the Walmart leadership. So that's about as big as it gets. So people pay attention to what she says. So you guys ought to pay attention as well. What you're thinking about 45's ban on diversity training and what he said about it in terms of it being inherent, saying that diversity training teaches people in those trainings that the United States is inherently racist or evil, and whatever else you have to add.
Well, when I first saw that, there are very few things that happen with him nowadays that cause me to be like, oh, I'm surprised. But the level to which this was so a misrepresentation of what diversity and inclusion really is and what diversity training is. Anti-racist training, anti-racist learning sessions is designed to expose people and bring them to a point of understanding history and understanding systemic racism and discrimination within the country. So it's not a matter of shining a light on everyone and saying, oh, if you're a white person, you're racist, or you have benefited from racism and therefore you're inherently bad. That's not the purpose of it, and that's not what happens. The quote that they pulled, the report that they pulled from, was a report from Fox News where a couple of employees that went through a training took out one or two sentences based on a discussion and said, this made me feel bad, and now they're trying to brainwash us and say that we're all racist. And so his statement to say anti-racist training is un-American immediately made me think, oh, so being anti-racist is un-American, so therefore being American means that you're racist. Is that what you're saying? So this is...
I've often said that it's interesting when you go back to Colin Kaepernick and all those things, that racism is so inherently deep and entrenched in American society that when you protest racism, you're likely to be accused of protesting America.
Right.
And so you protest that part of it and they call you unpatriotic. What do you got, Jay?
Well, first of all, I think when you're talking about any sort of diversity training, the presumption is that there is an ism somewhere, right? So if you're training about gender or gender identity, it's because there's a presumption that the underlying current and undertone is homophobic behavior and thoughts, right? If you're training about women and how to treat them, there is the underlying presumption that the way that we operate tends to be in a sexist manner. And that's not just men who would be sexist against women, but everyone. I mean, as Black people, we have our own notions and subconscious thoughts about each other, right? And so you don't need diversity training if there's not an inherent bias. That's the first thing. There's supposed to be, otherwise we don't need to do this work. But as Keisha pointed out, it doesn't mean that the individual person is horrible. It means that this is kind of how the country's been run, and the thinking, it's such a subconscious thing And that's why it's so powerful, because when you're paying attention in a diversity training, you become aware of your subconscious thoughts. It's not that you're necessarily out there thinking, I would love to kill some Black people and some Mexicans. That's not what people are thinking, but there's a lot of subconscious and background thought that you need to become aware of. And so I think that this is where they are totally off the mark, but they want to be, right? Because the bottom line is that they want to create hysteria around this. And one of the things that worries me is that when people who don't really want to be doing the training anyway, you know, those people who are like pissed off because they got to do a training at work, they're mad anyway, no matter what the training was. But now they can look at it and be even further disgusted. And then they can go into it with their minds totally closed and walk away saying, that wasn't for me anyway, because they kept telling me that I'm awful. So it has a potential to just have such ongoing consequences now that he's said it. It doesn't even matter if we prove that it's not true. There are some people who are going to believe this, and it will govern how they behave at work and in the community.
So we've had several themes on iKnow.media. First of all, part of the whole logo and the theme is a sword that says information is key. And another one of our themes has been the two things existing in one place. And another one has been these false narratives. So it's all about this false narrative. What do you got, Elisa?
I think Jay, as Jay was pointing out with diversity training, a lot of times it is so you can self-reflect. But I think it's also on the other side of what you could self-reflect on. Not necessarily that you're a perpetrator of it, but you may be receiving it and not knowing it. I know that when I remember in junior high at Leicester Middle School in Okinawa, Japan, this little boy decided that he should grab me. And it was the first time, I think it was 6th grade, and our 6th grade class got a sexual harassment orientation. And the entire group of 6th grade girls were like, they've been doing this all year because I got boobs this year. And so I think though it allowed people to realize is sometimes it allows people to realize that, oh, these actions, I don't have to tolerate these actions. And so it's empowering for your employees. I think that what I need for my fellow Americans who are like, oh yeah, we didn't want this training anyway. I need you to ask yourself why. Like, why is the president at this point in time coming out and saying this is un-American? When everybody's saying he's feeding this underlying monster of America, and it's historically our monster, which are racist, specifically men, but women can be racist too, aggressive racist men. This is, in my opinion, this is fueling their rage and be like, yeah, I've had to sit through that training forever. And so I think it's once again giving that platform for these people to say, even our president knows that y'all are crying racist when you don't need to.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of what happens with that is we're moving into this place. I don't know, did anyone else on here read Animal Farm a long time ago? You know, some of us animals have more rights than others. He's starting to give people the news, like he's all in. How far is he willing to go? He's now starting to talk about what we can contract for. They've got this thing that looks sort of like the secret police. He's stacking the courts. He's attacking the media and doing the Eddie Murphy. Are you going to believe me or your lying eyes? It wasn't me, right? They're throwing things out about socialism and Marxism. Some of these evangelicals that he's trying to appease right now are saying that critical race theory or Black Lives Matter is steeped in Marxism, right? And the same people who can't spell socialism are now saying Marxism. So how far is he going to go? He's telling us what to believe, narratives. What do you got, Keisha?
Well, I think that there's a misconception about what diversity training or development is. And, you know, Jay talked about it with regards to subconscious and subconscious biases. There are certain things in terms of the stories that we tell ourselves and the stories that we have absorbed and internalized growing up from media, from social media, from, you know, experiences. There are certain stories that we believe about other people. Diversity is about understanding the inherent differences in people, but it's about understanding how people are all equal. You may just have different abilities. You may look differently. You may choose a different sexual orientation, whatever it is. But it's about recognizing that just because I'm different from you does not make me inferior, and it does not make me a threat. That is the fundamental goal of all diversity training. Anti-racism training is one where you are specifically focused on the whole notion of not being racist. It's not enough just to say, well, I'm not wearing a hood, I'm not burning a cross, I'm not out here burning the flag, I'm not, trying to lynch Black people. But there's a difference in being complicit by saying I'm not doing any of those things, and then being anti-racist, which means that you're actively championing being against it, which means that you are doing things to go out of your way to make sure that Black people are equally represented. You're going out of your way to make sure that there are microaggressions that are not happening. And so everything that 45 is doing right now, because I can't say his name, but everything that 45 is doing right now is feeding into this ignorance that people have of not really understanding what this is. And so all of their fears, because racism and all isms are rooted in a fear of inferiority. You're afraid that the other person is somehow better than you. And because this other person is better than you, or may have more advantages than you, or may have more ability than you, then you're going to go out of your way to hold them back and to hold them down. And so what he's been doing is feeding into this huge inferiority complex that a whole lot of people have, where they feel like, oh, well, minorities aren't going to be the minority very much longer because they're outnumbering us. Or I don't know if I can actually get this job if I had to compete fairly, unless, my white skin didn't make sure that I got the mortgage, or I got the loan, or I got the contract and the other people didn't. So everything that he's speaking to is speaking to people's fear that they are not going to be able to compete. And that's what the dog whistle is. It's all about fear of being displaced, fear of losing out, fear of not having the inherent privilege. So he knows exactly what he's doing, because he's playing to those people who feel as if this country is being, quote unquote, taken away, which I find ironic considering it wasn't your country to begin with. You came here and just like bogarted people that were welcoming you.
So you mentioned dog whistle. Interestingly enough, so on a recent show we had on David Holder, who's a pastor, Conrad Tiller, who's a pastor, and they were hopeful in terms of their outlook. So I don't want to go down that dark hole of not being hopeful, but I think we're beyond the dog whistles now. He hasn't absolutely said certain sentences, as in 45, punctuated them with exclamation points, but he's all but said it. This idea that the United States will be a country that's a majority of minorities by, I think, 2050, I believe this is their way. It's a concentrated effort to put the brakes on and slam the brakes on, and they don't care whose head goes through the front window, and inciting violence, calling people anarchists, supporting militias, allowing some militias to enact and attacking certain protesters, and stacking the courts. Everything I said, he's all the way in. So my question would be to Jay Sharif, why is it then, if he's not in, if you want to go counter to what I'm saying, which sounds alarmist, if he's not all in, why is he so concerned about calling a mural outside of Trump Tower in New York City hate speech, but you've never heard him talk about hate speech from neo-Nazis, or hate speech from the Ku Klux Klan, or hate speech from people who are terrible against homosexuals and lesbians? What's going on?
Well, I mean, I think that he's an opportunist, for one thing. I think that he will pick anything to promote his personal agenda. But honestly, I think that so much of this stems from the fact that he's just a very ugly and destructive individual, before we even bring in how he feels about people who are different than he is. And that's part of what makes it scary that he leads our country. I think that he will use things to his advantage, and we know that he'll twist the truth, he'll lie, He'll make up, what is that? She said alternative facts, you know, that kind of thing. And whatever the situation is, I think you can't even expect consistency from him all the time, because I think he'll change as it suits him. But I think when it comes to these issues of race, I think he just is I think he truly is a racist individual. I think he's always been that. I think he's grown up in a culture that didn't demand that he be tolerant of people. I think he had access to this empire where he was king. He could do what he wanted. He could like who he wanted. He could include who he wanted. He could fire who he wanted, and he could change anytime he wanted. He didn't have to observe any rules, laws, or policies in his kingdom. And he came into the White House already racist and bitter and narcissistic and ugly. And he told the country that it's okay to be all of that. And I think whenever he gets a moment to express some of that, he does it. I think in this case, he gets to use this strategically right now. I mean, because we've always had diversity training. This isn't new. But he's using it strategically right now because there's an election upcoming. And it serves his purpose. And it serves his purpose because he's kind of slipping a little bit with his popularity based on concerns about how he's managed coronavirus. And I think it's just very convenient for him. But I do think that he means it. And I don't think that he wants to see people of color included. I think he wants to very much see them only be footstools for him and people like him. And when I say people like him, I don't even mean all white people. I mean wealthy white people. I think that's who he's looking to have a strong hold. I don't think he cares about the average white person. But I think this is all part of his personal narcissism.
Yeah, and they're afraid of thought. They really are trying to control people's thought through false narratives. I mean, and it's so scary how close we're pushing up to certain lines. For those of us who may remember A Clockwork Orange from years back, I mean, what's next? First is going to tell us you can't have this training, break the contracts because it's evil. What's next? Don't read. Only take what we tell you to read. And if we catch you, we're going to send these. How fitting, right? A Clockwork Orange. We're going to send these guys out there with bats and sticks, and we're going to beat you up, and we're going to tell you what you can read and absorb, and we're going to burn books. That sounds alarmist, but I promise you, where we've been, it's been heaped on us inch by inch by inch. If you were to start with today's behavior and actions and publish that 3 years ago and say, this is what's going to happen, no one would believe it.
I think some of us would have. I think absolutely many of us would have. His supporters not, but we kind of knew what was coming. That's why we had all the jokes about Black people moving to Canada if he was elected, right? Because we knew it was possible. And unfortunately, he's lived up to a lot of that.
Yeah, so we knew it was possible, but I didn't know that it would be so supported so vehemently by the U.S. Congress. So, Elisa, what do you got? And then we're going to wrap up with Keisha on this show and go from there.
I mean, this guy has said he thought that the North Korean leader was a good guy, that he led well. And what do there? Like, they dictate what you can read, what you can be exposed to. And Kenny, as you pointed out, he may not have come out and said verbatim, rich white men rock, but he completely tweeted a video that said it and never mentioned the video again. So he has said it. Like, whatever you tweet is your voice. So he has said it, in my opinion. And that's why I think when you talk about, I just can't deal with you right now. I can't deal with talking to someone who can say that this isn't a dangerous line that he's crossed. I can't talk to you right now because you are trying to make yourself comfortable in a situation that is scary and dangerous, specifically for me and my family, but for most of the people I hold dearest to me. So I just don't appreciate the America that he's seems to be wanting to recreate.
Gotcha.
And I think that one thing that people have to realize is that racism fundamentally is about two things. It's about a subconscious inferiority complex, and it's about fear. And he has, from the moment he got in office, during the time he was campaigning, he has been stoking the fear of people who feel like their way of life is being threatened.
Mhm.
And banning anti-racism training, you know, talking about there are good people on both sides when you talk about Charlottesville, not condemning neo-Nazis or the KKK, but talking about Black Lives Matter as being a terrorist organization domestically. There are things that he is stoking the fire of fear, because when you stoke the fire of fear, you get people to do things and to agree to things that rationally and morally they would say, oh, there's no way we should do that. They may feel like it underneath, but they would say, oh, there's no way that we should, you know, go back to the Jim Crow era where Black people had to, you know, go through the back door and use only certain, you know, be able to eat at certain lunch counters. Oh, there's no way that we're going to say that, you know, we don't value the lives of everyone and it's okay to murder Black people in daylight by the police. Oh, there's no way. So because he's stoking that fear, people are more apt to say, as long as you're going to keep me safe, I'm okay with it. And so that line keeps getting pushed further and further as to what's allowable, because they justify it by saying, I'm afraid for my livelihood, I'm afraid for my life, I'm afraid for my position, I'm afraid for my privilege. How many times have Black men been murdered by police and by vigilantes because they said, I was afraid for my life? And therefore that justified everything. So what he's doing is stoking fear. He is gaining more and more traction and getting away with more and more because he is speaking to people's fear. And that is the issue that nobody wants to talk
Right.
about and
And
nobody wants to admit.
so he stirred that pot by continuing to put forth false narratives. And at the beginning of this show, Jay Cherie said she's tired. This is exhausting. Elisa said it a show ago. It's part of our purpose. But what is interesting is the idea that people tried to run this fact check on him, and this is why I giggle, but they got exhausted. I mean, how do you keep up with constantly fact checking a guy who's lying sentence after sentence after sentence?
Mhm.
It's exhausting. Yeah. And so, you know, it reminds me of the debates when people talked about getting someone who could fight him. And I said, you know, before, back in 2016, you can't win when you wallow in the mud with a pig. It's their comfort zone. You just can't, you know, and so it's kind of scary, all of it. Well, thanks for being here, Keisha.
Thank you guys for
Jordan,
having me.
Jay, and Elisa. To the next show, and Keisha, we may have you in on our next show about 1619, because Keisha was also a public school teacher before, guys.
I've had many lives.
All right.
Well, thank
Take
you guys
care.
for having
Good night.
us.
Bye-bye.